What is up, guys? Mcdoubles back again with a brand new video, and today we're going to be playing some Soul Chicken that's going to be using Soulfire with Moonkin form, and yeah, there is no ifs, ands, or buts. It is a true Soulfire build. The DPS is going to be much more satisfying than in my last Fire Hybrid video, where that build really didn't go too well. This one is viable, and that is by no stretch of the imagination. It is definitely PvE viable, so hope you guys enjoy the video. Let's jump right in. Okay, let's be real. You guys wanted Spirit Chicken. I'm going to give you Soul Chicken instead. I think it's far better. And we are using the Molten Armor, so there is some of that initial Spirit concept in there. And for those of you that don't know, Molten Armor, including Fell Armor, used to have far better effects earlier in the alpha, much more overpowered effects, and now they're a little bit weaker. So a full Soul Chicken build is not really the way that you want to go necessarily. Perhaps, maybe somebody can prove me wrong. But we have the next best thing. In fact, again, I think it's better. We have Soul Chicken. So here's how it's going to work. First and foremost, I'm very impressed by the DPS I was able to pull with this build. As you can see in the background, we were actually able to nail over 4,000 DPS pretty consistently once I began to get this build right. Now, this is how you play the build. First and foremost, you're going to want to pick up Immolate alongside Conflagrate, Corruption, and Soulfire. These are going to be your main 4 damage spells, and the way that we're going to be able to pull very good DPS with the Soulfire is by nailing the following random enchants. Now, Mystic enchants, random enchants, are incredibly important for your build, and in many cases, they are essential for the success. In this case, I would say that the Soulfire build is not even playable unless you have the proper random enchants, and so do keep that in mind if you aim to build it yourself. Now, first and foremost, you're going to want to get your hands on Controlled Burn for your legendary RE, and I will talk about a ulterior option for PvP if you do want to try this in PvP. I don't recommend it unless you're in a BG and you're free casting, but nonetheless, Controlled Burn is very good. Why is it good? Well, first of all, what it does is it causes my Conflagrate spell to no longer consume my Immolate, and what this is going to do, despite the fact that this also increases the cast time of Immolate by 1.5 seconds, what this does is it means I can cast my Conflagrate very liberally and not lose that consistent damage of Immolate, and the Conflagrate is essential for the success of this build, and we'll get into that with the talents, but Controlled Burn is going to be incredibly important. Now, the reason that Conflagrate is so good is because if we take a look at my talents here, if we go over to the Warlock tree and the Destruction tree, on the very bottom left we have a little talent called Backdraft. Now, Backdraft says when you cast Conflagrate, Mind Blast, or Shadow Burn, the cast time of your next 3 destruction spells, that of which are only the spells that you can see on the left here, so Shadow Bolt, Immolate, Searing Pain, Soulfire, I would assume maybe even Rain of Fire, and then of course Incinerate. All of those are going to have 25% reduced casting time. Now again, in order to make a Soulfire build work, you're going to have to reduce the casting time as much as you can. And Conflagrate is going to be essential, as I said, for doing so. So we want to be able to cast it liberally without losing damage, and that's what Controlled Burn lets us do. On top of that, in order to min-max the damage of the Conflagrates, because we will be getting quite a lot of them off, you want to go ahead and hit up 3 improved Immolate REs. Then what we're going to do is you're literally going to type Soulfire into your search bar. You're going to pick up Quick Soulfire. I know, the green ones, they look weak, but every little bit counts. We're going to get 3% reduced casting time with Soulfire by getting Quick Soulfire. On top of that, we're going to get 3% crit with Soulfire by getting Critical Soulfire. This is important for the success of this build. Again, doubling down on the Soulfire. Now, on top of that, what we're going to go ahead and do is, because we are running the very nice Corruption, we are running it primarily for the use of this particular RE, Eradication. Now, what Eradication does, if we take a look at the Affliction Warlock tree, again on the bottom left, it says when you deal damage with Corruption, you have a 15% chance to increase your spellcasting speed by 20%, and that lasts a whole 10 seconds, so essentially, it should almost always be up 100% of the time on boss fights. That's very good. 20% increased casting speed. Your Soulfires are going to be casted incredibly fast with that. Now, if we go back to the random enchants, you'll notice that what Eradication does is it increases the haste granted by Eradication by up to 6%. So 26% spell haste. Now, lastly, what we're going to do is you type in Critical Mass. Now, Critical Mass is a random enchant that takes its name from the talent in the Fire Mage Tree Critical Mass, which just increases the crit of fire spells. We're going to take the RE for 3% increased crit crit with all of our fire spells. That is Immolate, Soulfire, and Conflagrate. That's incredibly good by itself. And then with those REs, as you can see right here, you have a pretty, satisfying set, right? It's just done. Now, let's go ahead and jump into the talents, as these are very important. I had to do quite a lot to get my talents right, guys. There was a lot that went into this. I clocked myself going from about, as you can see in the background, 3.6-ish to 3.7 to 3.8, and I just kept trying to build my DPS up. At one point, I even got stuck around 3k or even 2900, and I was like, what am I doing wrong? But I was able to figure it out. So let's take a look at talents. First and foremost, the most important part of the talents, the most important tree rather, is going to be the Warlock one, but more specifically the Destruction Warlock tree. What we're going to be getting from the Destruction Warlock tree is increased damage, right? This is where your damage comes from. We're going to take all of the talents that boost your Immolate's damage in a significant way. So we're going to be taking Improved Immolate for 30% increased damage, including Aftermath for 6% increased periodic damage, which of course will translate into my Conflagrate, as Conflagrate does do 60% of my Immolate's damage instantaneously. So that's very good. On top of that, we're going to go ahead and take Bane. Bane is essential for the build. It not only reduces the cast time of your Immolate, so it's not even longer, but it also reduces the cast time of your Soulfire by a really high amount at 1.5 seconds, while also simultaneously reducing the mana cost of everything of your Destruction Warlock spells, but that's basically everything, by 10%. Now, the bread and butter of this spec is going to be getting crits with your Soulfire, and the reason for that is because we're going to be using Ruin. Ruin increases my critical strike damage bonus with Soulfire and Immolate and Conflagrate by 100%. That's going to give me incredibly high crits, about 10k, spamming 10k crits on about a 1.5, maybe even a 1 second cooldown, depending on how the cooldowns and how the procs line up. That is a ridiculous amount of damage. You also have the Immolate and the Corruption ticking at the same time, and you have an Imp, we'll get to that, and so that is a lot of residual damage. Now, this talent is because I was trying to PvP with the spec, so admittingly, you could put this somewhere else. It could be good in PvE situations if you just happen to take damage, but again, this is if you want to play the build in PvP, you want to reduce all your pushback by 100%. You can take other things as well. You'll see I took Icy Veins down here for a very similar concept as well. But again, you have 2 points to play with. There's many things you could do. I might just throw them over here into critical mass for 4% increased crits. In fact, when we do the live dummy target test, I think I will go ahead and make that switch. Now, if we go back to the Destruction Warlock tree, we take 6% crit with Devastation. We also go ahead and take Shadow and Flame. And then, of course, we have Backdraft, as I alliterated and talked about before. Now, if we go into the Demonology tree, we're going to get the next piece of the puzzle. That is the Imp. Right? And the Imp is very important because what the Imp does is it not only provides residual damage, which is quite good, but it's also going to provide, as a result of this talent, Master Demonologist, 5% increased fire damage and 5% increased chance to crit with fire spells. So that is what the Imp gives us, on top of an extra 5% crit for us and 10% more for the Imp himself. On top of that, you need Decimation. What Decimation does is when your target is below 35% health, it essentially turns your Soulfire into an execute by increasing the cast time by 30% indefinitely until the creature dies, as long as you keep casting. You're going to be casting so damn fast, and this is something I cannot test on dummies, that I think the DPS is actually going to be so ridiculous at the execute phase that it's almost impossible to say this build won't be viable. Once you see the DPS I'm about to pull, and you think about how much higher it will get during the execute phase of every boss fight, you begin to realize and put together the pieces of the puzzle for a really strong Soulfire build. Now, because all of the things that we're using happen to coincide perfectly with the Molten Core talent, we're going to go ahead and grab it. Now, this not only increases the duration of Immolate by 6 seconds, incredibly useful so we don't have to get off that long Immolate cast time as often as we would like. We don't want to have to cast that very often, as we do lose DPS during the cast, so you have to get it perfect. But more importantly, it says when your Corruption deals damage, you have a 12% chance to increase your Soulfire's damage by 18%, and its critical strike chance by 30%. Now, with all of these talents put together, we are approaching 100% crit chance with Soulfire when the stars align. And so that is incredibly strong. And then on top of that, we have Demonic Pact. This says when my imp crits, I get 5% of my spell power increased for 45 seconds. This will basically last indefinitely, and it also affects my party. We also get a flat 5% increased fire damage, which you really can't scoff at. Now, if we move over into the Mage Tree, we took firepower for 10% increased fire damage across the board, and then at this point, we're just going to be taking major cooldowns. I went ahead and I took Combustion to increase the critical strike damage bonus of my fire spells by 50% and give me more crits with my Soulfire. On top of that, if we go to the Arcane Tree, we have Arcane Power now, which increases all of my spells damage by 15%. And in the Frost Tree, Icy Veins for even more spell casting speed. And if you do want to play this in PvP, this is going to be essential so you don't get interrupted, because yeah, losing those Immolates and those Soulfire casts is a death sentence, right? The meta is fast. Now, lastly, in the Priest Tree, we grab Power Infusion for a very similar thing. It actually works quite well, and has actually caused us to create a Swifty one-shot macro, which I'll go ahead and show you here, where you basically just take Combustion, and you show Tooltip Combustion because it has the longest cooldown, right? And you want to pop them all together, and then you just cast all of your spells, Arcane Power, Power Infusion, Combustion, and Icy Veins, and it really leads to a ridiculous damage window. Now, most fights won't last past 2 minutes, but if they do, and you're able to get off this combo twice, that's going to be even more devastating. It also leads to some pretty funny one-shot situations, or close to, some situations in which not even a healer could possibly survive against you in PvP, and that's very fun as well. Now, let's get to some of the key abilities that aren't talent-based for this build. Of course, you need Soulfire, Immolate, Corruption, and Conflagrate, but past that, we're going to take the following abilities. We're going to take Curse of Elements to increase our damage, and on top of that, we're also going to go to the Enhancement Shaman tree and take Flame Tongue Totem. Now, I'm also going to be taking Flame Tongue Weapon. This can be substituted in the Demonology tree for Create Firestone if you would like it to be. We also have, as you can see, in Fire Mage tree, Molten Armor, and in the Paladin tree, Blessing of Kings. Now, an important thing to keep in mind with this build is that when we are raid buffed, as we do not have many buffs for just ourselves, when we're raid buffed, DPS is going to go up pretty significantly, and that has me very excited when we do the DPS tests. We have the Mana Emerald. The Mana Emerald is not only good for just, standard PvE, just in general, but if we want to go to a more PvP-oriented spec, I do actually just go ahead and recommend you take Infused Gems for your Legendary RE. Taking off your Immolate in PvP matters a hell of a lot less. You just want to get that Conflagrate off instantly, and you also need the short cast time on the Immolate. That's going to be provided to you as a result of replacing your Legendary RE. What Infused Gems will then do is give you even more spell haste, right? Which is always good for this build. It's BIS, right? It's amazing for this build, and so that's a very good RE that you can take. And I also recommend you take Life Tap, because one of the talents I somehow forgot to go over, but it is important, that we took is Mana Feed, which gives my imp 100% of the mana that I gain through Life Tap. And your imp has a tendency to run out of mana spamming Firebolt, so this can be good. And if the fight happens to go very, very long, you may run out of mana too. And of course, in dungeons, if you don't want to have to be constantly drinking, having Life Tap can be very advantageous, right? We didn't talent into it, it's just simply not necessary, but very good nonetheless. So with that being said, let's go ahead and get into the live dummy test. Alright, so here's what I'm going to do. First and foremost, I'm going to go ahead and apply the Curse of Elements. This increases all of the magic damage taken by this dummy by 15%, and that is a whole lot. I'm then going to do the following. We're going to Immolate into the Corruption, pop cooldowns, Conflagrate, and then spam Soulfire. For the entire fight, guys, I'm just going to spam Soulfire, with the exception of renewing Corruption and Immolate when they are about to come off of my targets. Now, keep in mind, you cannot sleep on the Corruption, as that not only procs stronger Soulfires through Molten Core, but Eradication procs as well for more haste. And so keep that on your target as often as you can. If you had to choose between one of the two dots, you would always want the Corruption up every single time. So let's go ahead and see what we can do. First and foremost, we have the Immolate. Let's put the imp on. Do the Corruption, pop the cooldowns. I accidentally used something I shouldn't have. Damn it. Alright, let's see what happens. Little bit scuffed, but for the sake of cooldowns taking a while, let's just see what we can do. Look at that damage, guys. Look at that damage. Alright, let's get this Conflagrate off. Into the Corruption. Conflagrate, Molten Core, Soulfire. And you can see, we were scuffed in the beginning, and we're still over 4K. Basically without even putting much effort into it, as it's just Soulfire spam. Right, we got the Conflagrate off. We'll renew the Immolate. Probably a tad too early. I could have snuck in another Soulfire, but that's okay. And yeah, we are now... I'm going to go ahead and stop, but that's about 4.4k where we stopped, and as you can see, it was going up. It's going to continue to go up. Very mana intensive, but as you can see, the life tap kind of negates it entirely. We're a Blood Elf. I'd probably go Gnome, but Blood Elf works too for Arcane Torrent, giving you a little bit of extra mana. And with that being said, you know, things like Power Infusion come off a little bit faster in the fight compared to things like Icy Veins. You might be able to get that off again too for a 20% reduction in the mana cost of your spells. One thing to keep in mind is that the stars can very much align. I didn't even have Flame Tongue weapon up. I just realized that. And I didn't even have my totem down. So you know what, guys? I'm going to wait for these cooldowns. 4,400 without having some of our buffs up and without being raid buffed. Let's go ahead and test it again. I'll do it in about a minute with all of my stuff, and we'll see what we can do. Alright, let's go ahead and try it again. We have the Curse of Elements up. I have my Flame Tongue totem. We are fully buffed, and let's see what happens. Oh, Imp, get off. Oh, God, no. Imp, get off. So, I have my keybinds in a slightly different position. Actually, never mind. Let's not mess it up. Let's go ahead and do exactly what we did before. Immolate. Into the Corruption. Into the all CDs Conflagrate. Now we'll just spam Soulfire. 11k. Jesus. That is so high. Right, Conflagrate after that Soulfire, just wait it out. Keep on doing the Soulfires. See how it gets really fast out of nowhere? Let's go ahead and renew the Immolate. Conflagrate. And you can see we're approaching 5k DPS. Now, it's a huge bummer when you do not crit. We'll just keep it at 4,700. It's a huge bummer when you do not crit with your Soulfire, as I'm pretty confident that my crit is towards 100% right now. We have 31% baseline, 3% from our REs makes it 34. I mean, I guess it's not 100%. I didn't even think about it too hard. It looks like it's more like 65 to 70% crits. So, you know, it's much more likely that we will crit rather than not. So that's a bit of a bummer, but it's quite strong. What I want to go ahead and show you guys is just like me DPSing in PvP to show you that, you know what, if you can find the right abilities to make this work in PvP, prevent yourself from getting interrupted and get everything off with the Mana Gem RE, you know, the damage for this build is actually absolutely ridiculous. And I do think that with a little bit of perfection, we can bring this build up to 5,000 DPS consistently the entire time, if it's not already there with raid buffs, etc. Now, one thing I do want to say before I jump into a quick DPS PvP check in the next clip is I want to tell you guys that if you go to the Hero Architect and you go to the bottom, or now it's the second to the bottom, you'll have Soul Chicken, right? And that is this exact build ready for you guys to pick up. You can just click on it, activate the build, and you've gotten everything that you need with a list of the random enchants and some recommendations for gear. One thing to keep in mind, and this was told by me from a friend, and I forgive you. And forgive me for forgetting the name as it was just randomly in game, but he is my friend now. And what he taught me is that... And what he reminded me of is that the way that staves are balanced now is that they actually give, and I say now because the last time I really played a caster was Season 3, right? But yeah, they give 8% spell haste, and using a one-hand and an offhand does not do that. Since spell haste is the most important stat, I thought, you know, that was a really good idea, so make sure to use a staff. But like I said, it's in the Hero Architect. It's called Soul Chicken by Mcdoubles. You guys can play it too. Anyway, let's jump into some PvP. Alright, so for a PvP target dummy test, we're going to fight Galanorla real quick. He is full damage reduction. That's what he just told me, so this is going to be pretty interesting. We're going to do the same Pve rotation and just see what happens. So I'll start off with the Immolate. Into the Corruption. Into all cooldowns. Oh, there's some lag there. Oh my god, look at the damage despite that. Look at that. That is ridiculous. That is strong. That is actually really cool. I'm really happy with that. Now, yes, you're going to get interrupted and dominated most of the time, but if you can just sit in the back and throw Soulfires, guys, that hits hard. That is really, really hard. But okay, guys, that's going to be the end of this episode. If you guys enjoyed it, make sure to give it a like and to subscribe. Those likes help so much. It's the most important thing. But like I said, that's going to be the end of this episode. Hope to see you guys in the next one. Mcdoubles out.